guest with me. Her name is Shareen Rivera. She is an author and a public speaker, and she shares her experiences as a survivor from a 10-year marriage that had domestic abuse. And she is also a ghostwriter. So I'm super excited to have you here today, Shareen. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited as well.
Awesome. You have like this sun coming over you, and it's like kind of cool. It's like
Thank
making
you
it
so.
making you look all angelic. So awesome. So Shareen, I have you here today to share, you and I both share a past with domestic abuse and being single moms and making that choice to step out and essentially, step away from what we thought we were going to be in for our entire lives, in these committed marriages, and realizing that they were toxic and that we had to leave. So, Shareen, if you would share with me, I know you have an extensive story starting from your childhood and as well as in your marriage. So if you would just share with us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, so I met my ex-husband when I was really young. I was 20 years old, and he already had 3 kids by another woman. And at the time, I was just having fun, and we really didn't have much in common besides going out and drinking and stuff. And then I was going to leave, and then the mother of his children died in a car accident. And it really, that triggered me, that family, me always wanting a family. And I felt like it was my duty to stay. I couldn't leave, And so I stayed, and we got married the following year. And I got married, out of an ultimatum. I got married 3 months after getting beat and moving out. I got married on all the wrong conditions, against everybody's, advice to me, against my own gut feeling. I did it because I thought I knew better and I could make this work. And I stayed in that marriage until I was 30 years old, and I had 2 children. And it wasn't until I had my second child, my daughter, and she was about 5 to 6 months old, and he had left for an entire weekend, turned off his phone. And when he came home, I was just so upset, and I was holding our daughter, and I was yelling at him, and I was crying, I was begging for answers. And I pushed him to turn around and listen to me. And he turned around and kicked me in my chest while I was holding my daughter. And I fell against our glass mirrors, and I turned, and I saw my son, dropped my daughter. My son was screaming, just looking at me. My daughter's screaming, and it's like I woke up. It was just like it took that 1 second for the whole mind shift to take place. And from that moment on, all I could think about was getting myself ready to leave and getting financially prepared and having a plan and just leaving. How am I going to leave? How am I going to leave? And that's all I thought about for 3 months. I left a 10-year marriage in 3 months.
Wow. Wow.
And I left leaving everything I've ever known. I raised my stepsons. I left my family, my home. I just now moved back into my home. I left my home. I had loans under my name, like for his business. I ruined my credit. Like I left,
Yeah. You and I have similar stories in that, that there are those moments, right? There are those breaking moments where you have a wake-up call. And I too, it took me about 10 years. And when you said planning, right, I made that choice to get out. And for me, it took me 2 years. So for you to get out in 3 months, like amazing. I say if people are need to get out right away, of course, get out right away. There's places available. For me, I felt like I had to have a strategy in order to do it to keep us safe. And so that first year after I decided, it was really building my mindset up and just building myself up and reaching out and reconnecting with people with relationships outside my marriage because I was so isolated. And that second year was building up my credit and getting myself financially ready to be in a space to where I could do it.
Yeah.
So that I know that feeling that, and there's like this drive that engages, and it just reminds me of like a bull. There's like literally like this bull that comes in. And for me also, I don't know if this is really in alignment with you, is when I finally made that choice to leave, like I was leaving my job of, at the time, 10 years. I was leaving my family, my state. I was a homeowner. I was walking away from my home, walking away from every relationship I'd ever connected because I was moving out of state. When I did that, like I literally, it was so overwhelming for me. It was one of the few times in my life where I literally just said, I can't do this. Something else has to take over now. And when I did that, every door opened, like literally, like every door just flew open.
Very similar to what I experienced, because after that incident took place and I left the house, like literally I left, and I spent an hour in the car by myself just crying, and I literally just had a conversation with God. I was like, I can't do this on my own. I work 3 days a week. I don't have any of my own money. I don't have my own money. I don't have family. Like I was going over everything I don't have, and something just silenced me and said, stop worrying about it. Stop worrying about it and do what you can. And after I had that mindset where I'm just going to do what I can, I literally just started saving like $20, $50 in a jacket in my closet. And I'd count that money every day. And then all of a sudden things just started happening. Like my best friend moved over here and she needed someone to live with. And then I was looking for apartments, and I found this apartment that didn't require a deposit. And it was just like all these just things started falling into place for me. And I knew that I was doing the right thing, regardless of what everybody else around me was saying, regardless how it looked. I knew that I was doing the right thing.
Yeah. I call that intuition, right? Following that intuition. And so I feel like, and this is for me, and it may be true of you, I feel like listening to that intuition was something that I didn't do. I feel like I was given those signs that my relationship choices weren't necessarily right. And I would just go, oh, intuition, go ahead and go by the wayside. I'm going to go ahead and choose this anyway.
That's what I did for 10 years.
Right. So isn't that, I don't know, I find it amazing that those things that we quiet, when we finally listen to them, they truly are the things that are meant for us and lead us in the direction.
Let me tell you, I remember after having my son, I got really sick with preeclampsia with my son, and my blood pressure didn't go down after I delivered, and I was just really sick. And my ex-husband was tired of sleeping on the couch, so he told me to sign the papers to go home, that I'm fine. And so I listened. Why? I don't know. And so I signed the papers, and the nurse comes in. She goes, well, you're going to leave by 5 o'clock, so be ready. And he comes to me and he goes, I'm going to go to Chili's and watch the Raider game. I'll be back for you. I'm like, are you really? You're leaving? And he's like, yeah. Well, 5 o'clock rolls around and I'm sitting in a hallway holding my newborn son. I sat in that hallway for 3 hours.
Wow.
Holding my son, not being able to get a hold of him because he wasn't picking up. I had to call my sister, who didn't really drive at the time, who had to pick me up with no car seat. And I went home that way. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't right.
You know what? Right. Yeah, you and I are so aligned. So when I had my first child, I was left in the middle of labor all by myself. Literally in labor. And I remember like through the night, he actually said he needed to go sleep in the car because the room and the chair wasn't comfortable enough. So he took a set of pillows and he went to go sleep in the car. And in the next morning, I was like, I can't do this by myself. I sent the nurse to go out and get him out of my vehicle. And my car was not there. She said, that car's not in the parking lot. It's not here. And so not only did he physically abandon me there, but he literally left. And
Now you're emotionally stressed out with your
right,
baby.
he showed up literally 5 minutes before I had the baby. And then he helped me move my things from the labor and delivery room to the after room.
Mhm.
And I didn't know this at the time. So I just, had him move the things. And then, like you said, he didn't ever come back. He never came back to get me. So my grandmother had to drive me home, and it was a 30-mile windy road. I actually had her pull over because her driving was so terrifying to me. And I drove home. I stopped at the store to buy, how they give you that list of things you need after you have a baby? I
Yeah.
didn't know that you had to have all those things. And I stopped at the store and I went in and I went to pull my money out, and I had a couple $100s. And I went to pull my money out to pay for it, and I had no money.
Oh my God. He could.
So he had stolen the money when he moved the stuff and then left and never came back to pick us up. And I was actually in two wonderful relationships. This was the first one, not the one I was married to. But it's just amazing how we accept these things. And the reason why I say accept these things is because that's not something I would tolerate or accept. But there were smaller behaviors up to that that really didn't make that shocking.
Yeah, it prepared you. And then you started justifying their behavior like, this is who they are. This is what they do. Like, you just accept it. This is who they are. It was just acceptable that he did these things. I mean, every single memorable event in my life in that 10-year period was always ruined by him. I gave him that power to ruin it. Even bringing my daughter home. It was like the same saga. The first day that I was here by myself, he threw my clothes out of my closet and broke my closet mirrors, arguing with me. With
right. All of those things, right? And then
signs,
yeah, and then we were talking about this earlier, is we were talking about mirroring and how we end up mirroring those in our relationships.
Yes.
And sometimes that mirror comes in to show us our shadows. And then sometimes that mirror comes in, and if we aren't careful enough, we will then start mirroring that behavior back.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've learned, at least for me, is that some of those behaviors that I was tolerating is because I was telling that intuitive voice to like stop. And I felt like for me that was something that I learned in childhood growing up. I learned like, oh, this isn't right. But it was people that were raising me and caring for me with toxic behaviors. And I had to go, oh, stop, intuition, go away. I'm supposed to accept this and respect this person. And this is supposed to be what people have described to me as affected. So I feel like my childhood really led to accepting those behaviors. Do you feel that way at all? Like your childhood has led to...
I feel like I never got a chance to really deal with my issues as a child because all of my adult life and teenage life, I was in relationships. I was in a relationship since 14 years old with an 18-year-old man. I was with him until I was 18. And I was with my ex-husband until I was 20 to 30. I never dealt with the issues that I had gone through with my dad leaving me, my mom being mentally ill, an alcoholic, a meth addict, homeless. I never dealt with those issues. And honestly, I feel like inside of me, I didn't feel worthy of being loved because I wasn't loved by my parents. And so therefore, I accepted any behavior from a man. And it wasn't until I learned really how to value myself and what I'm worth. And, it's something I was telling you that I've realized I am not 100% healed. I'm not like, okay, I've overcome this. This is like a lifelong journey. And you know, people, when you stand for something and you have a message that you want to give people, you get judged on a whole different level than everybody else, because then people that know you or people that have seen you, they're like, oh, who is she to talk? She has this and that, you know? And I'm here to say, judge me by my progress.
Yeah,
You know,
certainly.
I'm
I
not
think
100% healed. I'm not 100% perfect. I still deal with a lot of triggers, a lot of inner child issues, a lot of trauma that needs to be healed. I'm still healing and I'm still learning about myself. And it's a lifelong journey. But the first step is being aware.
yeah,
Aware of
certainly.
it.
Certainly. And I think stepping up, I think a lot of times people think, oh, I have to be perfect. And that's really, that word perfect, there is no description of perfect. If
No.
you are going to describe something as perfect, I guarantee you that that concept was given to you by somebody
Not only
else.
that, people want to see the real. They want to see the struggle. Like, I'm out here making everything public and vulnerable to help others that are going down this path and know that they can also help other people. Like, you don't have to be 100% healed or overcome the situation. You can still be healing and share and help other people.
Certainly, even in my own upcoming podcast,
Yeah.
I had some struggles with selecting the name of that, but I had to really go, no, this is what people need. And, it's called Finding Mommy's Soft Voice. And then I put the label family healing on there. And so, my own family is like, what? Why would you put family healing on there if we are still going through a healing process? Like, I don't, like, you're a fraud, you're a fake. And what I had to explain to my own family is that's what I'm seeking is family healing.
That is your goal.
And, right. And what I was seeking also was finding a calm, peace, non-rapid voice that was just like, I needed to be calm and peaceful. And I needed to find joy. And those two things I found. And when I'm not in that space, I know how to use tools to get myself there. And, when I did ask my family, we've talked about this and they're like, they like the mom I am now more than the mom I was before. But am I perfect? No, I'm not perfect, right?
Exactly.
We were talking about like housekeeper and all that homekeeping, like, hey, don't judge me by that, right? But when it comes to saying, you know what, I'm imperfect. I have been through these experiences and I've been exposed to these things. And now I've learned from them and I've been able to transform my life, not perfectly, but to a state of where I can accept it and be happy. I think more people need to show up like that, because when people show up at the end, when then they're just like, hey, here's the end. Like, I thought that I was broken. I thought I couldn't achieve what I was seeing because I was just seeing the end result.
I think
So,
that the
yeah,
most important step is just really being aware of the things that you need to work on. Like, I still deal with my feeling of abandonment. Like, I was telling you this when I get in arguments with people and like they don't talk to me or they need space or it right away triggers something inside of me and takes me back to that place where I was a little girl trying to get a hold of my dad, then takes me back to that place in my marriage when I was like, didn't want my husband to leave me and walk out that door. And it was like, I have to be aware of that. I have to be aware of things. And then not only that, I was telling you that when your energy is contagious, when you're in an abusive marriage for a decade of your life, you are bound to pick up habits that you didn't necessarily have before. I told you before I got married, I never used to even cuss. I was raised by my grandparents. I didn't believe in cussing. I was against it. You would never hear me saying even the F word, nothing. And then pretty soon I was talking like a truck driver, cussing all the time. Like that was just part of my normal vocabulary because, I picked up his way of talking. And It's just like that with physical behaviors. When you're around somebody that's abusive, you start becoming abusive too. You start insulting them. You start, I started hitting him back and hitting him and pushing him. And like, these are behaviors that I didn't have inside of me that were picked up. I picked up these things. And so it's stuff that I'm clearing still. You have to clear all that. You have to be aware of it and stop yourself, because if you don't admit that you have these issues, they'll never be healed. They'll never be healed. You know?
For me on my healing journey, Shareen, the wake up call for me was, it was about a little over 2 years ago, and I was holding my daughter who was 2 at the time, and I had a young adult son, and he and I were going at it in the same way my ex and I were. And I literally was like in the moment was terrified, because here I was acting in a way of what I was leaving, of what I left. I left everything to get my kids away from this. And then here I was repeating that relationship with my own child who is now an adult. And so having to realize, wait a second, what is the common denominator here? It's me. So I'm going to have to really look at this, because this is not what I want. This is not, this is, and for me, it was that wake up call of like, how did I get here? How did I get into this space? Because like you said, a decade-long marriage, and then here for me, it was almost another decade. And I'm like, wait a minute, where is this coming in? And so acknowledging and realizing that for me, those behaviors, while they were stronger in my male relationships, the type of treatment overall, if you were to just classify it and not, and you looked at the emotions that were being triggered, they were the same emotions that were getting triggered as a child coming up. And it was fear, right? Just fear. I went to a wellness expo last weekend, and I walked up to a domestic violence table, and I really thought, I've been inspired by your work. I've come out sharing with you about my own story, and I really thought, I'm going to be ready to work with this organization. And I stepped up to the table, and everything was great. And then she mentioned the way that they serve the community is that they have a panel of women, of survivors, and they bring in men who are going through a program because they're abusers. And literally everything inside my body, I was shocked. I was triggered. It took me back to a space of fear inside just for a few seconds. When I imagined being in front of abusers, just that thought terrified me. And when I think about that feeling, I was just as terrified of my mother. I was just as terrified of her, which is funny because she was she was into child development. She did daycare. She didn't with everybody else, she didn't do those things, but she had learned behaviors of how she was parented that trickled down and then carried over. So yeah, they say it's like the gift that keeps on giving, abuse, right? And my point to sharing this is I had to realize that my mouth was toxic and abusive, and which meant my mind was toxic and abusive. And so those are things that I think was probably the hardest pill for me to swallow, is that I had some accountability and things I needed to go clean up, and that I will probably still be cleaning up the rest of my life.
I think one thing, just as mothers and, healing and doing it on our own, I think one thing that is the most important thing that I have found to show my children is how I love myself, so that they can exemplify the same behaviors when they grow up. I never saw real self-love growing up. I always saw sacrifice. my grandparents sacrificed. And by no way am I putting that down, but I never saw anybody really loving themselves, working out, meditating, creating sacred space, you know, just really just showing themselves care. You know, I saw people putting up with behaviors, sacrificing, justifying things. And so therefore, I grew up thinking that's the way to be. And now around my children, I really want them to see what it means to love yourself, to know your worth, to talk nice words to yourself. You know, I always tell my children how powerful their words are. Don't call yourself stupid. Don't call yourself dumb. You know, I really believe in showing your children how to talk to themselves, how to treat themselves. You know, that is just so important, because when they see you talking to yourself nice and treating yourself nice, that's the way that they'll treat themselves.
Yeah, certainly. You know, Shareen, one more question before we go. We talked about the kids. One of the things for me is they always say, you need to get out, you need to get out. And I'm like, yep, you need to get out if it's really bad. And so I would minimize it in my head, because one would get I was just so used to it, right? But I kept staying for the kids. And now that my kids are adults, I truly, truly see the impact on it. And now that I'm trained in development, now I know the impacts and how it's showing up in their life today. Do you see that in your own family, where your
Even
choice is to
myself,
say,
he's only 6, but he's witnessed so much as a child, a baby. He's seen me get hit. He's seen me get thrown. He's seen things being thrown at me. He's seen me kicked. You know, he has witnessed so much, and maybe he doesn't remember it, but he is starting to show like little signs of that behavior. And I'm trying to help him work through that, you know, through that anger, because they absorb everything. And I can't imagine if I had stayed longer and then being older, growing up in that, how it would be. I don't know. I don't even want to think about that. But
yeah,
family, for sure. Yeah. Just putting up with toxic behaviors has just been a family cycle. And it goes on and on and on and on. And it's almost like, oh, because they're your family and you love them, you have to tolerate them. And I'm starting to learn how to set up boundaries for myself and protect my energy space, because I absorb energy from other people, and I could feel that. And because I care so much, I tend to try to take on the world's problems and solve everything. And you have to learn how to protect your own space. And sometimes that means even isolating yourself for a minute to reset, you know, and focus.
Yeah, certainly. One of the areas that I help my clients with is in healing that generational nurturance. And so when you were talking about your son, I was thinking about this. And then as you shared your experience, it just compelled me even more to share this, which is, this is something that I've had to learn myself, is there's a difference of having a baby and going, oh my gosh, I'm going to get so much love from this baby. I'm going to get so much from this baby, and this is going to be awesome. And there's another thing to have a baby and be like, wow, I'm bringing this human being into this earth. What is it that I have to give? And what is it that I'm going to do? And then in return, receive this love. And the reason why I mention this difference is because one is where we're taking and giving back, and another one is where we're giving and receiving. And so as parents and nurturing, it should go from the parents to the children and receive it back. And so what I find and what I'm hearing here too is that generational thing going on of where that cycle's reversed. And so we have an opportunity as well energetically to like change that cycle instantly. Because what ends up happening with kids is if we're not getting that energetic connection of nurturing, then we become the nurturers. And so we do that and we become the nurturers. And what's interesting is one would think that if you're a nurturer as a child, when you grow up, you're going to still be the nurturer. But the roles switch because then the child becomes the nurturer. So a lot of times that can show up as anger or frustration, because imagine going to work and maybe your role is you're the door greeter at the door and they're asking you to balance the accounting tables. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is so much for me, right? Because you're not ready to do that. It's that same thing for our kids. And so me hearing that just really changed my dynamic with my kids. Is this new information for you? And
No, no, yeah, I totally agree. And um, about being the nurturer, when children, you know, from the age of conception to 5 years old, they say that that's what really wires them. So during that period, if kids are constantly hearing you fight or in the middle and begging daddy to stop, they're put into that role where they're trying to be the nurturer. They're trying to be the mediator. And children are not wired and built or mentally prepared, emotionally prepared to deal with all of that, you know, and that stays inside of them. And emotionally, every cell in their body then starts becoming wired that way. And so those are the residual things that I'm still dealing with my son.
yeah, and even, I mean, I think even for both of us, this is coming up in our own lives as being that nurturer. And
Yeah,
so I have a question for you. So you are doing awesome things.
thank you.
You are out there, you've written a book, you're out there sharing your story publicly, you're helping others share their stories by, you know, being a ghostwriter and helping them write their stories. Um, what is it that really took you from that space of going, who am I to share my story, to, you know what, I'm going to do this. I may not be fully prepared and I may have a lifetime ahead of me, but I'm going to do this now. What was it that drove you?
Um, it was really my children. After I left my ex-husband and I went through my journals and I read my poetry, something inside of me just told me that I need to share this, that somebody will benefit from it. And my intention wasn't to become a published author. So I hated public speaking, by the way. Okay. I used to turn red and sweat. I would never have imagined myself being a public speaker. My intention was just to put my poetry out there so that women can resonate with it and help themselves heal. Well, once I started telling my story and I realized that there's so many people that need help getting the courage to leave, getting the courage to share, and how therapeutic it is sharing, that just kind of built up the momentum for me to keep pursuing that. And while I was pursuing that, I started discovering myself. I started finding purpose through my pain. And it's been really an integral part in me healing, is being able to give back lessons and wisdom and courage and strength to other people. It makes it worth it to me. Yeah.
Beautiful. I heard you say that the journey was in sharing, the journey was in those experiences, and it's still going to continue to be in that. How can people find you?
You can find me on all social media platforms under Shareen Rivera, and then my website's www.shareenrivera.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for opening up and sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I can't wait till we can talk again.
I know,
Bye-bye.
me too. Bye.